September 22nd, 1979. It is the dead of night in one of the most desolate regions on Earth. The southern Indian Ocean, specifically the stretch of water between South Africa and Antarctica, is a place of violent storms and absolute emptiness. There are no shipping lanes here, no commercial flight paths. It is a void on the map. High above this churning darkness, an aging American satellite known as Vela 6911 is drifting through its orbit. It has been watching the Earth for 10 years, far past its expected lifespan, looking for one specific thing: the blinding, terrifying signature of a nuclear explosion. At 0053 Greenwich Mean Time, the satellite's sensors scream. They detect a flash of light, but not just any light. It is a double flash. A distinctive, terrified heartbeat where a blinding pulse occurs is briefly obscured by the shockwave of a fireball and then re-emerges as the fireball expands. In 1979, physics told us there was only one thing in the known universe that produced that specific light signature in the atmosphere: a nuclear detonation. But when the data hit the desks at the Air Force Technical Applications Center, something was wrong. There was no declaration of a test. No known nuclear power was operating in that sector. And when the seismographs around the world were checked for the ground-shaking rumble that always accompanies a nuclear bomb, they were silent. The sky had screamed, but the Earth was quiet. This was the beginning of the Vela Incident, a mystery that has haunted intelligence agencies, physicists, and conspiracy theorists for over 4 decades. What could the satellite have possibly detected? Was it a secret test by a rogue nation? A glitch in an old computer? Or something else entirely? To understand why this flash caused such panic in the White House, you have to understand the machine that saw it. The Vela satellites were not general surveillance tools. They were specialists. Born out of the 1963 Partial Test Ban Treaty, they were built to ensure that no one, not the Soviets, not the Chinese, was cheating by detonating nukes in the atmosphere or underwater. The sensors on Vela 6911 were calibrated to ignore lightning, to ignore meteors, to ignore solar flares. They were looking for a sequence of light intensities measured in milliseconds. When that specific pattern was detected, it was considered a high-confidence event. In the history of the Vela program, these satellites had detected 41 nuclear explosions. They had never been wrong, not once. So when Vela 6911 reported a flash in the South Atlantic, the initial assumption in Washington wasn't that the machine was broken. The assumption was that someone had just detonated a nuclear weapon in secret. The timing couldn't have been worse. President Jimmy Carter was fighting for re-election, and his foreign policy hinged on nuclear non-proliferation. If a new player had just entered the nuclear game, the global balance of power was about to shatter. The immediate question was, who? The location pointed to 2 primary suspects. The first was South Africa. At the time, the apartheid regime was a pariah state, isolated by sanctions and desperate for a strategic deterrent against the Soviet-backed forces in neighboring Angola. We now know that South Africa was indeed building atom bombs at the Pelindaba facility. But did they have the technology to test one? The second suspect was Israel. Speculation ran rampant that this was a joint operation. Israel providing the technology, South Africa providing the remote testing ground and the uranium. But as the days turned into weeks, the physical evidence that should have been there simply wasn't. Usually a nuclear blast leaves a fingerprint. Radioactive fallout drifts on the wind. Iodine-131, cesium-137. The U.S. Air Force flew 25 sorties of WC-135 aircraft, planes designed to sniff the air for radiation, into the area. They found nothing. The seismic stations, as I mentioned, showed no tremors. But there were other signals. Strange, disconnected pieces of data that painted a confusing picture. Thousands of miles away, at the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico, a radio telescope detected an inexplicable ripple in the ionosphere, moving from the southeast to the northwest at the exact same time as the flash. It was a disturbance consistent with the shockwave of a nuclear explosion, rising into the upper atmosphere. Then there was the hydroacoustic data. The US Navy had a listening system known as SOSUS, designed to track Soviet submarines. While the records remain largely classified, leaks suggested that hydrophones in the region picked up a weak, underwater reverberation that matched the profile of a small, low-yield explosion near the Prince Edward Islands. So, you have a satellite that has never been wrong saying yes. You have an ionospheric ripple saying yes. You have Navy listening devices saying maybe. But you have the air sniffers and the seismographs saying no. Faced with this contradiction, and the potential diplomatic nightmare of accusing Israel or South Africa of breaking international treaties, the White House convened a panel of distinguished scientists, led by Jack Ruina from MIT. Their job was to analyze the data and find the truth, but many in the intelligence community believed their job was actually to find an excuse. In the summer of 1980, the Ruina Panel released their report. They concluded that the signal was likely not a nuclear explosion. Instead, they proposed what they called a zoo event, a freak occurrence. Their leading theory? That a micrometeoroid, a tiny grain of space dust, had collided with the satellite at the exact wrong angle. They hypothesized that a piece of debris might have hit the sensor, dislodged a fleck of paint, and reflected sunlight into the lens in a way that just happened to perfectly mimic the double flash signature of a nuclear bomb. The odds of this happening were astronomical. The statistical probability was close to zero, but it was a politically convenient answer. If it was a rock hitting a satellite, there was no diplomatic crisis, no treaty violation, no need to sanction an ally. The intelligence community, however, wasn't buying it. The Defense Intelligence Agency and the Naval Research Laboratory issued their own reports, largely classified, which essentially said the Ruina Panel was wrong. They argued that the double flash data was too perfect. The duration, the intensity ratios, it all matched a 2 to 3 kiloton warhead. They pointed out that the lack of fallout could be explained by the weather. A storm in the region could have washed the radioactive particles out of the air before the planes arrived. The lack of seismic data could be explained if the bomb was detonated on a barge, suspended in the air by a balloon, or if it was simply a very small tactical yield, designed specifically to be quiet. Decades passed, and the mystery only deepened as secrets began to leak. After the fall of apartheid, South African officials began to talk. Deputy Foreign Minister Aziz Pahad stated in 1997 that there was a strong rumor that a test had taken place. Even more compelling was the testimony of Dieter Gerhardt, a Soviet spy who had infiltrated the South African Navy. He claimed that the flash was indeed a joint Israeli-South African test, codenamed Operation Phoenix. According to Gerhardt, the weather that night was chosen specifically because a storm front would mask the event from prying eyes. And then there are the sheep. In 2018, a study was published in a scientific journal analyzing the thyroids of sheep slaughtered in Australia in late 1979. They found traces of iodine-131, a short-lived radioactive isotope that is a hallmark of nuclear fission. The timing and the wind patterns suggested the source was the southern Indian Ocean. The sheep, thousands of miles away, had potentially eaten the fallout of the Vela Incident. So where does that leave us? We have a flash seen by a perfect witness. We have spies claiming it was real. We have radioactive sheep. And yet, the official position of the United States government remains that the Vela Incident was a mistake. A trick of the light, it sits in history as a ghost event. If it was a nuclear test, it means two nations successfully detonated a weapon of mass destruction in complete secrecy, fooled the world, and got away with it. It implies that the surveillance net we trust to keep us safe is full of holes, or worse, that the data it collects is subject to political rewriting. On the other hand, if it really was a micrometeoroid, it means that our most advanced technology can be fooled by a speck of dust, bringing the world to the brink of crisis over a shadow. To this day, the files on the Vela Incident in the U.S. National Archives remain heavily redacted. The full report from the Naval Research Laboratory is still classified. Someone somewhere knows exactly what happened in the dark over the South Atlantic on September 22nd, 1979. But they aren't talking. Until they do, the flash remains just that, a burst of light in the darkness, signaling a danger we chose to ignore.